More than 11 million tourists visited the city during the first quarter of the year. China's economy grew 5.3% in the first quarter year-on-year. And President Xi Jinping meets visiting German Chancellor Olaf Scholz in Beijing. Hello and welcome to TVB News. More than 11 million tourists visited the city in the first quarter of this year. That's almost a 150% increase year-on-year. With the mainland's Golden Week holidays just around the corner, Chief Executive John Lee said government departments have already prepared for the influx of tourists, with more details to be announced later. Timothy Lee has our top story.
Hong Kong has seen a continued rebound of tourists in recent times. Around 11.2 million visitors traveled to the SAR in the first quarter of this year. That's almost a 150% increase year-on-year. Mainland tourists continue to account for the majority of visitors at around 77%, or some 8.7 million people. Regarding non-mainland tourists, those arriving via short-haul flights almost doubled on a yearly basis, having reached 1.4 million people. While those who came via long-haul flights and from new locations reached 700,000 and 130,000 respectively. The Hong Kong Tourism Board noted the increase in the number of tourists is a gradual process. This as authorities are planning measures to facilitate an influx of mainland tourists during the mainland's Golden Week holidays, as well as to prevent the recurrence of visitors being stuck in the city past midnight while on their way back to the other side of the border.
當然啦，已經喺呢方面有良好嘅經驗。
On the flow of visitors, we already have good experience in this area. On the actual implementation, the Culture, Sports and Tourism will make an announcement. I'm confident in the management of the boundary control points. Some control points will see smoother traffic, others will see longer queues. And it's important to let people know we will make plans to attract more visitors.
Earlier, the Tourism Board announced it will organize fireworks performances on May 1st in a bid to attract more tourists during the upcoming holidays. Timothy Lee, TVB News.
With the Labor Day Golden Week around 2 to 3 weeks away, authorities have stepped up inspections around shops that cater specifically to mainland tourists. But with a change in spending habits, will the mainland's peak travel season bring as much revenue to such businesses as before? Jackie Lin checked out one such store today.
The Tourism Industry Authority, together with Hong Kong Customs, patrolled registered shops catering to inbound mainland tour groups in Kowloon Bay, To Kwa Wan and Tsim Sha Tsui, as officers told shop managers not to engage in aggressive commercial practices. They also checked the licenses of tour guides and whether the groups followed the approved itineraries. The Tourism Industry Authority said over these 2 weeks, officers will make rounds at tourist hotspots and shops to collect data from businesses and mainland travelers to improve preparations for interdepartmental endeavors during the Golden Week. With the change in travel and spending habits among mainland tourists, many shops are also bracing for impacts on their revenue. This jewelry shop manager said the economy in China and the world is not faring well, and that has affected the purchasing power of their mainland customers. What they can do now is to lower the price in hopes of boosting sales, he said. The average spending of overnight visitors in Hong Kong reached a high of $8,100 in 2013, before recording a gradual decline over the years. After the border reopened in the wake of the pandemic, spending returned to $6,900. But the Tourism Board expects a dip this year to $5,800. Xia Baolong, the director of the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office, earlier said the city has to adapt to changes proactively, with a change in market structures and consumption patterns. Echoing the sentiment, the tourism sector lawmaker Yu Pak Leung said it's also important to develop new attractions, such as cultural and sports tourism, with mega events like rugby sevens and historical sites to incorporate more entertainment and creative elements. The Travel Industry Authority also called on travel agents and tour guides to step up arrangements to minimize the nuisance on nearby residents. Jackie Lim, TVB News.
China's economy grew 5.3% in the first quarter year-on-year. The faster than expected growth was largely credited to the boost in high-tech manufacturing. On a quarter-on-quarter basis, the country's gross domestic product grew 1.6%. According to the National Bureau of Statistics, industrial production between January and March rose 4.5% year-on-year. Retail sales growth, however, slowed to 3.1% in March. Unemployment in major cities went down by 0.3 of a percentage point to 5.2%. Beijing has set an annual growth target of around 5% for 2024. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz met with President Xi Jinping in Beijing today on the final day of his three-day visit to China. President Xi said cooperation between China and Germany is not a risk, but a guarantee for stable ties and an opportunity for the future. This amid complaints by the EU about Chinese goods flooding the bloc's markets. Tracy Furness has more.
As the two leaders met in Beijing, President Xi Jinping said ties with Germany would continue to develop as long as the world's second and third largest economies sought common ground. We must view and develop bilateral relations in an all-round way from a long-term and strategic perspective, Xi told the German Chancellor. Xi added, as long as both sides adhere to mutual respect, seek a common ground while reserving differences, communicate and learn from each other and achieve win-win cooperation, relations between the two countries will continue to develop steadily. Xi told Scholz there are no fundamental conflicts of interest between China and Germany and that there are no security threats. The two leaders took a stroll in the garden of the Diaoyutai State Guest House before meeting for one-on-one talks. Scholz's three-day visit to China was his first since his government launched a de-risking strategy last year to avoid relying excessively on Chinese suppliers. His visit also coincides with EU concerns about the threat to European businesses from Chinese goods, including electric vehicles and other green technologies flooding the bloc's markets. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has complained about China's overproduction being unfairly supported by massive state subsidies. But Scholz has been cautious about pushing away China, saying the EU should not act out of protectionist self-interest. Tracy Furness, TVB News.
Australian police have described Monday's knife attack on a well-known bishop in Sydney as a terrorist attack motivated by suspected religious extremism. A 16-year-old was today arrested after the attack at the Christ the Good Shepherd Church. Popular Bishop Mari Emanuel and a priest were stabbed as the former was giving a sermon that was streamed online. Followers around the world watched in horror as the boy began his attack before being pinned down by churchgoers. It was the second major stabbing incident in Sydney, days after 6 people were killed at a shopping mall. A crowd of hundreds seeking revenge gathered outside the Assyrian Orthodox Church, injuring police officers and preventing police from taking the teen outside. Police warned people not to take the law into their own hands. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese described the attack as disturbing.
Last night, a 16-year-old who has been apprehended was accused of stabbing a bishop at Christ the Good Shepherd Church in Wakeley. This is a disturbing incident. There is no place for violence in our community. There is no place for violent extremism. We are a peace-loving nation. This is a time to unite, not divide as a community and as a country.
Former U.S. President Donald Trump was in a Manhattan court on Monday, taking the defendant's seat for the start of the first of his 4 criminal trials. It is the first time a former U.S. president is standing trial on criminal charges. NBC News has more.
Donald Trump sitting in a Manhattan courtroom today, watching the process of whittling down a pool of hundreds to a jury of 12 with 6 alternates, people who will soon sit in judgment of the former president, the first to ever face a criminal trial.
We're not going to be given a fair trial. It's a very, very sad thing.
200 people summoned to the courthouse today, questioned about their backgrounds, media preferences, and views on Mr. Trump. In deep blue Manhattan, many jurors swiftly dismissed for saying they cannot be impartial. The judge driving home the stakes of the unprecedented moment for the presumptive GOP nominee, warning Mr. Trump today, if he fails to show up, he risks arrest. Mr. Trump has pleaded not guilty to the 34 counts of falsifying business records, a low-level felony, but the story prosecutors seek to tell more sordid and sweeping, previewing their central theme today of a presidential campaign rocked by the release of the infamous Access Hollywood tape, fueling Mr. Trump's determination, in prosecutors telling, to buy the silence of Stormy Daniels, allegedly directing Michael Cohen to pay her $130,000 so that she wouldn't go public saying she had sex with Mr. Trump, something he maintains never happened. The former president later reimbursing Cohen through a series of checks, allegedly doctoring his company's internal records to cover it all up.
That payment was to hide damaging information from the voting public. The participant scheme was illegal.
The judge ruling prosecutors cannot play the Access Hollywood tape at trial, but can introduce what he said. Mr. Trump's team expected to highlight how the previous DA and federal prosecutors declined to press charges in this case, while Mr. Trump lambasts the case as a Democratic conspiracy to hurt his re-election chances.
This is a persecution like never before. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. And again, it's a case that should have never been brought. It's an assault on America.
The trial expected to stretch on 6 to 8 weeks and feature testimony from Cohen, Daniels, members of Trump's inner circle like former aide Hope Hicks, and possibly Mr. Trump himself.
I would testify, absolutely.
The risk of cross-examination, substantial, but the more immediate threat, possible violations of the gag order prohibiting Mr. Trump from attacking trial witnesses.
Still ahead, more than 100 people evacuated from a building in Yau Ma Tei after a fire broke out. And the first DSE exam for the citizenship and social development subject. Welcome back. Israel's military chief said his country will respond to Iran's weekend attack as the international community urges restraint on both sides. Iran launched more than 300 drones and missiles on Israel last Saturday, but most of them were shot down by Israel, U.S., and their partners. Amid Israel's war on Gaza and regional fears of escalation, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu summoned his war cabinet for the second time in less than 24 hours to discuss their response. The U.S., meanwhile, said it would not join any Israeli counterattack. Nasvi Karim with more.
Israel's military released more video footage of the damage to the Nevatim airbase caused by Iranian missiles during Saturday's attack. Opinion is divided on whether Iran's volley of more than 300 drones and missiles was deliberately measured to avoid fatalities or, as the U.S. believes, was meant to cause significant destruction. 4 missiles landed on Nevatim, which one military expert says is the most heavily defended spot on the planet against air attacks.
I've seen reporting that the Iranians meant to fail, that this spectacular and embarrassing failure was all by design. I've also seen Iran say that they provided early warning to help Israel prepare its defenses and limit any potential damage. All of this is categorically false.
U.S. President Joe Biden has already told Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that Washington would not take part in any counterattack against Iran. The U.S. and other countries are urging Israel to show restraint.
We are not involved in their decision-making process about a potential response.
And according to Israel's military chief Herzi Halevi, Iran can expect a response. Saturday's attack involved around 170 drones, more than 30 cruise missiles, and more than 120 ballistic missiles. It was in retaliation for an April 1st airstrike on Iran's embassy compound in the Syrian capital Damascus, which killed senior Iranian military figures. In Tehran, Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Nasser Kanani said Iran is not seeking escalation, but would act more strongly in case of any Israeli attack. Chinese media reported that Foreign Minister Wang Yi spoke to his Iranian and Saudi Arabian counterparts on the situation. Beijing wants de-escalation and said it is confident Iran will handle the matter competently. U.S. President Joe Biden, meanwhile, hosted Iraq's Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani. Biden told him that the U.S. was committed to Israel's security. Nazri Karim, TVB News.
In Washington, D.C., U.S. House Speaker Mike Johnson has unveiled a complicated proposal for passing wartime aid for Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan. Rejecting pressure to approve a $90 billion U.S. package sent by the Senate, Johnson's proposal faces a tough passage. Hardline Republicans are opposed to providing $60 billion of aid to Ukraine, but are in favor of sending almost $18 billion to Israel. Johnson said he would push a single debate rule, then hold separate votes on aid for Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, and several foreign policy proposals. However, the package would deviate from the one passed by the Senate in February, clouding its prospects. Iran's missile and drone strikes against Israel over the weekend put renewed pressure on House Republicans to act. Tang Kai-yin, one of 12 Hong Kongers who tried to flee to Taiwan in 2020, was sentenced to 46 months in prison. That's for 2 convictions on planning to make petrol bombs and perverting the course of justice. Tang earlier pleaded guilty to both charges. In August 2020, Tang was intercepted by the Chinese Coast Guard while trying to flee to Taiwan on a speedboat. After serving 3 years behind bars on the mainland for organizing an illegal border crossing, Tang was released by Chinese authorities and transferred to Hong Kong. In sentencing, District Judge Ernest Lin said Tang took on a leadership role in the explosives case and the entire plan to flee to Taiwan, including the purchase of a speedboat and the escape route. The judge said he would not take into consideration his 3-year prison term on the mainland in attempts to reduce his sentence in Hong Kong. A fire broke out at a residential building in Canton Road in Yau Ma Tei around 3:30 this afternoon. More than 100 people were evacuated. With the fire raging inside the apartment, firefighters were deployed to combat the blaze. An air conditioner fell onto the street below. 3 people were rescued from the roof of the building. One person who felt unwell was sent to Kwang-Wah Hospital for treatment. The flames were put out around an hour later. The first DSC exam for the Citizenship and Social Development subject was held today. The subject has replaced liberal studies as a new compulsory subject for the Hong Kong Diploma of Secondary Education examination. It aims to cultivate students' sense of national identity and proper values while helping them to appreciate the country's development. The results of the subject will be reported as either attained or unattained instead of having different grades. This year's exam questions include the application of artificial intelligence and how the participation of mainland study tours helps strengthen students' national identity. Some teachers said the questions are simpler than liberal studies and expect the attainment rate to reach 90% or above. Former government pandemic advisor Ivan Hung said on a TVB program that the city is well prepared for the next pandemic.
We are very much ready for the next pandemic, but we still need to work hard on the research. It could happen anytime. In fact, emerging viral infection could be happening maybe in a few years, and it's happening all the time. But the important thing, of course, is the surveillance. I think very important is that you need to survey for these emerging infectious disease and be prepared for the next pandemic. So I think if you have very good surveillance among both the animals and among the human, and then you prepare in every front in terms of vaccine, in terms of antiviral, then that will be very important.
Hung said the Center for Health Protection gets first-hand information about emerging infectious diseases through liaison with the World Health Organization and other institutions. That's the news. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.